Welcome to my channel. Make sure to subscribe, like and share the video. Let's begin. The new family, the Johnsons, had always dreamt of owning a big, beautiful house to call their own. So when they found an incredible deal on a large, old mansion in the countryside, they couldn't resist. They moved in and soon realized that their dream home was far from perfect. Strange things began to happen almost immediately. At first, it was just small things like doors opening and closing on their own, and strange noises coming from the walls. But soon, things took a much darker turn. Objects began to move on their own, and furniture would shake violently in the middle of the night. The family started to experience poltergeist activity that they couldn't explain. One night, the youngest daughter, Emily, woke up screaming. She was covered in bruises and scratches that seemed to have come from nowhere. Her parents, horrified, tried to comfort her, but something was different about her. She seemed distant and detached, and her eyes had a strange, vacant look. As the days went by, Emily's behavior became more and more erratic. She would speak in strange languages that no one could understand, and her body would contort in unnatural ways. The Johnsons soon realized that their daughter was possessed by a demonic entity that had been haunting the house for centuries. Desperate for help, they called a local priest to perform an exorcism. The priest arrived and began the ritual, but the demon fought back with all its might. The house shook and the walls seemed to bleed. The air grew thick with the stench of death and decay. Finally, after hours of intense struggle, the priest managed to banish the demon back to the underworld. But the Johnsons were left traumatized, and they knew they could never stay in that house again. They packed up their things and left, never looking back. Years later, the mansion still stands, abandoned and overgrown. The townspeople avoid it at all costs, afraid of the evil that still lurks within its walls. And the Johnsons? They still wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by the memory of what happened in that house so many years ago. Story number 2. As Macy left work and started walking home, she realized that she had forgotten her phone in her desk drawer. It was already 10 p.m., and she knew that taking a shortcut through the alleyway would save her some time. She hesitated for a moment, but the thought of getting home faster and getting some rest was too tempting to resist. As she walked down the dark and narrow alley, she began to feel uneasy. The air was thick with a heavy silence, and her footsteps echoed ominously off the brick walls. Suddenly, she saw a shadowy figure in the distance, moving towards her. She tried to speed up her pace, but the figure kept getting closer. As the figure grew closer, she realized that it was a dark, shapeless mass that seemed to be following her every move. She quickened her pace, but the shadow matched her step for step. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and her mind raced with thoughts of what could be chasing her. Finally, she broke into a run. But the shadow was still right behind her. She could feel it breathing down her neck, and she knew she had to do something. She turned around and shouted. But there was no one there. The shadow was gone, and she was left standing alone in the middle of the alley. Shaken, she continued on her way home, but the feeling of being watched never left her. She started hearing whispers and footsteps behind her, but when she turned around, there was never anyone there. Days passed, and the woman couldn't shake off the feeling that she was being followed. Her mental state deteriorated, and she started experiencing vivid nightmares of a dark figure haunting her every move. One night, as she was walking home from work, the shadowy figure finally caught up to her. It enveloped her in its darkness, and she felt herself being dragged down into the abyss. She screamed for help, but no one came to her rescue. The next day, her coworkers found her lifeless body lying in the alley. The coroner's report concluded that she had died of a heart attack, but her coworkers knew the truth. The woman had been haunted by a malevolent spirit that had driven her to the brink of madness and beyond. And now, that spirit was free to move on to its next victim.